So pretty much everyone has spent this week making fun of the Humane AI Pin. It's that little thing, that little square that you wear on essentially your lapel, and it is an AI interface to some type of back end that basically translates the request that you have into answers. It's essentially really fancy, like a really fancy Amazon Echo or a fancy HomePod or a fancy Google Home that you carry around with you. And a lot of the reviews were very scathing, right? They really dug into the device and talk about the reality of the product as it came out into the world. And it's a really interesting moment because about a year ago, Imran, I think he's like the founder or CEO, or he's up there, ex-Apple employee, heavily involved in the project, spoke for Humane on a TED stage. I didn't think it was a great look for Humane at the time. There's a lot of people kind of questioning things, like making fun of the announcement, even back then. And it wasn't like honestly a great look for TED either, in my opinion, at the time. But I want to go back to that moment and do a close read of the announcement video and kind of compare it to the realities of what is going on right now and dig into the philosophy behind the company that's trying to make this flawed product, right? Now, an interesting thing is that, this was a failed launch ultimately, right? A lot of people have talked about how the device is sort of dead on arrival, and I kind of agree with them. But without going back and understanding why they made the decisions that they did for this product, it would be kind of confounding to you why this product existed. So we're going to go back, we're going to read through essentially their announcement video, and then we're going to use that to figure out exactly why they made the decisions they did when they were designing this product.
I spent 22 incredible years at Apple helping to design experiences and devices ranging from the Mac to the iPhone and to the Apple Watch. And as the power of compute increased, the size of our computers or our devices decreased. The desktop paved the way for extraordinary interconnectedness, but it was stuck to your desk. The laptop provided portability, but you still had to be sitting down to use it. And the smartphone evolved us into the modern connected humans we are, providing millions the ability to access the internet from our pockets. And the smartwatch was a window to that phone, a companion device with a whole host of health insights, all shrunk down to your wrist. But what comes next? Some believe AR/VR glasses like these are the answer, but they merely move the screens we already have in our lives today to being just millimeters away from our eyeballs, a further barrier between you and the world. And the future is not on your face. In fact, in 2017, the legendary tech journalist Walt Mossberg wrote in his final column that he felt that soon, one day, technology would become invisible and that the computer would disappear. And we agree. Sorry, this is my wife. I'm gonna have to get this. Hello?
Hey, Dave.
Hey, Bethany. How's it going?
Good. Are you at TED?
Yeah, I'm on the red circle right now, actually.
Oh, great. Good luck. And don't forget to mention me.
I won't, babe. Thank you.
Love you.
Love you too.
Bye.
Bye. It's gonna get different in a minute. So my wife, Bethany, and our entire company at Humane have been working to answer the question of what comes next. And you may ask yourself, why? Why would anybody do this? It's because we love building technology that genuinely makes people's lives better. And we believed that artificial intelligence, or AI, would be the driving force behind the next leap in device design. And there is an incredible amount of stuff that's happening in this space. Huge advancements. And even Bill Gates has said of OpenAI's GPT that it's only the second most revolutionary technology demonstration that he's seen in his entire lifetime.
So I have talked a lot about this Mossberg column, right, that they reference. And they're talking about the Mossberg column where he mentions the disappearing computer. So much of this video is going to be about that because, number one, I really love that column from Walt Mossberg, right? Mossberg, famous tech reviewer, one of the OGs, extremely focused on the product, and one of the best communicators of technology for consumers. This was his final column in, I don't remember exactly where it was. I think he posted on Vox and originally was reviewing for the Wall Street Journal and things like that. But the point is that it was his last column after essentially decades of doing columns about consumer tech. And this was his forward-looking column. He was talking about the future of computing. And Humane, in their TED Talk, in their announcement TED Talk, literally named it the same thing that Mossberg named his sort of big concept, which is the disappearing computer, right? So Humane talks about artificial intelligence, right, being the driving force behind the next leap in interface design. And we'll get into that in more depth in a minute. And actually device design, I think, is what they say. And they also talk about Bill Gates's quip about ChatGPT and how it was the second most important demo or most fascinating or crucial or mind-blowing demo that he had ever seen in his time in technology. Now, let's begin there with Bill Gates' comment, right? He said that OpenAI's GPT is only the second most revolutionary technology demonstration he's seen in his entire life. What was the first, though? Do you know what the first was? It was the graphical user interface. And I think that that's key. It's a key thing in this discussion that we're about to have, because Gates is saying that AI, despite its profound effects, its potential for future profound effects on society, on the world, on us individually, that AI is only the second most important thing that he's seen, and that the graphical user interface is the first. Now, let's go back to the Mossberg column. In Mossberg's column, he talked a lot about how the world is going to become more of a computing surface at all times, right? If you think about the history of computers, they started off as these big machines. I talk about this on this channel all the time. These huge machines that filled the room. They were communal devices. It was like a church. You went to the priests of the computer, you gave them your program, they would give it to the machine would run it through, and then they would give you back an answer at the end. It was a communal experience. It was episodic in the most extreme circumstance. You would go there, quickly have your computation run, go back, and spend time on your own working on it. Now, as we transitioned to a personal computer, that shifted to a little bit more, personal, right? It was still episodic, but the time in and out of the machine was more fluid in a lot of senses, right? You might have seen you might have had a computer room in your house, right? That's how I started with my computer journey, right? I went to the computer room, I worked on the computer for a little bit, and then I left. Still very episodic in that way, and very in and out. It was a destination. Fast forward a few years. Then you get laptops, right? These portable computers that you can carry around with you. Maybe it's less about going to a specific place, and really the destination in a lot of ways becomes the laptop itself. So I go to the laptop, and the laptop is open, and I'm working on it. But then, of course, you close the laptop and you put it away. Still very episodic, but slowly more and more weaved into my day-to-day life. On from there. Mobile computing, the iPhone, right? Smartphones in general. Smartphones are a profound shift because they are still episodic, but the way that it's weaved in from our day-to-day is much more, it's a much higher pace. It's a much higher amplitude, or I guess not amplitude, but higher frequency, actually, right? So whereas before, you might very rarely go to a giant computer and go to the priest of the computer and give them your thing and spend very little time with the computer itself. Now you're spending much more time with a computer interweaved with your day-to-day life. As computing marched on, as computing power increased, computers became more and more and more personal. They got closer and closer to us, to travel with us, to be with us, but they also got more and more utilized. So, Mossberg talks about that when he talks about the disappearing computer. His claim, his thesis is basically that the computer will get so personal that it will become the environment around us, right? At the time he was writing this in 2017, it would have been called like ambient computing is one of the ways that people talked about it. But the point is that the world becomes so intertwined with the computer that we hardly distinguish between the two.
But what do we do with all these incredible developments? And how do we actually harness these to genuinely make our life better? If we get this right, AI will unlock a world of possibility for all of us. And today, I want to share with you what we think is a solution to that end. And it's the first time we're doing so openly. It's a new kind of wearable device and platform that's built entirely from the ground up for artificial intelligence. And it's completely standalone. You don't need a smartphone or any other device to pair with it. In fact, I'm wearing one right now. And it interacts with the world the way you interact with the world, hearing what you hear, seeing what you see, while being privacy first and safe, and completely fading into the background of your life. We like to say that the experience is screenless, seamless, and sensing, allowing you to access the power of compute while remaining present in your surroundings, fixing a balance that's felt out of place for some time now.
Now, when they talk about the three S's, screenless, seamless, and sensing, I want to talk about those in a little bit more depth. Let's start with the final two, seamless and sensing. Seamless. When they talk about something being seamless, they're saying that the interaction with the world around us has very little distinction from the computer itself. That means the seam between the digital world and the physical world becomes blurred. People talk about this all the time, right? It's sort of a marketing trope to say that, but that is what they're saying when they talk about seamless. They're saying that these things, the computer and the world, become one and the same. When it comes to Humane, what they're talking about is that AI is something that is more interactive. It's with you where you go. You kind of go along with the things as you go along. But other people have talked about it in different ways, right? But let's move on to sensing. Sensing is one of those things where Mossberg also talks about it, right? If seamless was Mossberg's point about the computer disappearing and becoming one with the world, sensing is something else that he brings up in his final column, where he talks about how computers will interact to the context around us, who you are, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're doing, where you are, things like that, right? In the context of the Humane AI Pin, their claim was that, number one, having it be so personal, it knows a lot about you, and therefore it senses what you are. Mossberg talks about a blood pressure change or an emotional change, a change in lighting, a change in time of day, a change in time of year. Any one of those environmental changes has an effect on the way you might expect a computer to react. And these two, seamless and sensing, are things that he talks about a lot in his article. And they're things that Humane definitely leaned into with the design of the AI Pin. But what about the first one, screenless? When they talk about something being screenless, I find it more difficult to figure out where they get this from in Mossberg's article. It seems sort of weird to focus on this screenless, especially the first one, right? But they say that it's screenless because they are sort of staking the company on this as what comes next. Right? They talk about as the next phase of computing being completely screenless in a lot of ways, right? And that they think that AI is the new UI.
And I can't wait to share more details about what we've built, and I will in the next few months. But today I want to talk to you about what it unlocks and what it means to be able to take AI with you everywhere. and what happens when technology increasingly disappears. Technology becoming invisible affords us new opportunities of how we interact with compute. We've become so accustomed to tapping on an app or moving a cursor with a mouse that it feels second nature. But that's by design. When I was working on the iPhone, I used to test interactions like slide to unlock with my infant daughter. She was the best possible focus group. She's 16 now, and she's got a lot more ideas than she did back then.
Okay, just a brief aside. This was the point in the talk where I was kind of losing the thread a little bit. I had no idea what they were talking about. I mean, what does he say? I was using my daughter to test interactions with the iPhone, and she was able to do it. And he's saying it like it's a bad thing, which, you know, I guess to an extent it can be framed as a bad thing. But a usable user interface is not an evil, right? It's actually a good in most ways, as long as used to good ends, right? Which the iPhone is just serving as a tool. So it seems weird to like put this here. It seems sort of shoehorned in as like a personal story and like a claim to fame to some extent, but also kind of getting at their kind of like core ideal. It seems like that screens are just inherently bad. And I guess that's what we'll keep coming back to, is that really Humane's like sort of founding principle, it's starting to feel like, is that screens equal bad, right? Screens bad.
This also, by the way, is the only non-AI generated image that you'll see from me today. And as I look at it now, I see more than ever why a future driven by AI is far better than a future that would involve more screens like this. He's cute though. But for the human-technology relationship to actually evolve beyond screens, we need something radically different.
And this is where they hit it home, right? For the human technology relationship to evolve beyond screens, we need something radically different, right? They're making this really big assumption that we need to evolve beyond screens. And remember, screenless, seamless sensing are the three kind of core tenets of their company. And that first one, the screenless one, is the only one that's hard to find in the article that they named their TED Talk after, right? The kind of big ideas that Walt Mossberg talked about. So it continues to be weirder and weirder and weirder to me that they stake the company on the idea that screens are bad. And in fact, you kind of see it, right? That they're really shoehorning everything into this idea that screens are bad, which is why they're leaning into the AI piece. But they even need a screen to an extent, a really bad screen. That's a projector, right? But screens are just these useful devices. Let me meditate on this and go back to the thing that Bill Gates said, the graphical user interface, right? The reality is that the graphical user interface is profoundly different than any type of interface you could have that is based on AI. Here's why. Effectively, if you think of AI, let's just think of AI as a spoken interface, right? Mossberg did talk about this in his article. He talked about the Amazon Echo and how it represented kind of the beginnings of what he saw as the disappearing computer, right? This ambient computing. And I think that is what Humane kind of latched on to. But when you think about the user interface considerations, when you have the difference between AI and a graphical user interface, or just essentially a two-dimensional display, right? You end up with very profound differences. Audio or text is a one-dimensional input device or output device, right? It's a one-dimensional interface. That's because when you're listening to something, you can only listen to one thing at a time effectively, right? You might have some depth with like music, for example, but when you're processing information, you can only process one stream of information at a time. If you miss something on a podcast, for example, right? I listen to tons of podcasts. You have to skip back and you have to listen to it again. You can't use your eyes to skim back. You have to use some type of interface to skim backwards and do that. And that brings us to the graphical user interface, right? The most cynical example is that it's a two-dimensional user interface rather than a one-dimensional one. But the reality is that the graphical user interface has always been three-dimensional for the most part, right? At least when it comes to the Mac, right? You have always had ability to layer things on top of each other, use spatial reasoning, right, to organize your windows on your display, or use spatial reasoning to organize the app icons on your home screen. And the design considerations for a 2 or 3D user interface versus a 1D user interface are completely different. It's very profound, that shift from a one-dimensional user interface to a two-dimensional one, let alone a three-dimensional one. Now, this is something that you'll kind of continue to see as a beat as we go through this, is that they really lean in on this quick transactional interaction weaved in throughout the day, right, in this one-dimensional way. And I think this gets at why they're thinking that screens are a bad thing, is that, like, essentially audio is less intrusive, essentially, on your life. But I just don't buy it. Like, you know, the reason that screens are so useful, and the reason that Gates said that the graphical user interface was the most profound, not the second most profound, the most profound demo that he's ever gotten, is because there's so much bandwidth that you're able to use when you use the visual system, both of a computer and of a human, right, in the human-computer interface. Now, this isn't to say that, you know, an auditory interface is not something we should be thinking about, right? First of all, there's lots of people with accessibility needs that would only have access to an auditory interface, right? But the reality is that there's so much in the world that is designed around our visual capabilities as humans, right? A really famous design consideration is the consideration of an affordance, right? An example of that is a door handle, right? A door handle is an affordance to opening a door. It's a great affordance because it reaches out from the door, almost extending its hand out to you, the human. And the shape of a door handle, especially kind of like a latch-based one, right, is about the shape and size of a hand. It kind of invites you to reach out and grab it and grasp it and figure out what you can do with it. And not only that, it really clearly shows you the direction that you can turn it. It becomes very clear when you grasp a door handle what you can do with it and what it does, right? As soon as you turn it, you quickly find out that it unlatches the door and that it allows you to open it. So not only does it allow you to unlatch it, it serves as a handle to pull the door open. It's a fantastic piece of user interface that we use every single day, right? And it's all based off of that affordance, a visual affordance first and foremost, something you can see. Now, there comes a point at which that is lost with an auditory user interface. There's something about an auditory user interface that doesn't afford itself to creating affordances. And we'll get back to that as we kind of go on.
Let me show you. Where can I find a gift for my wife before I have to leave tomorrow?
Vancouver's Granville Island is a lively shopping district.
That's an incredibly simple response for a very complex query. How often do we find ourselves in a new city, wrestling with our phones, trying not to bump into people, trying to figure out where we're going and where we're supposed to be? It's even harder when we don't speak the language, right? Let me show you something. Invisible devices should feel so natural to use that you almost forget about their existence.
Les appareils invisibles devraient sembler si naturels à utiliser. Vous oubliez presque leur existence.
You'll note that's me and my voice speaking fluent French, using an AI speech model that's part of my own AI. This is not a deep fake. In fact, it's deeply profound. This is my AI giving me the ability to speak any language, and you having a chance to hear me speak that language in my own emotion and my own voice. Thank you.
So I will say that this is the point where I thought that they hit the hardest. They actually did the best. There were two really cool demos that they just did, right? The first one being that complex query, right? The complex query was interesting because it really is. It's fantastic to ask in natural language and get a simple answer back to the query that you were looking for. But notice something about the answer. He even says it. It is a simple response for a complex question. Now, simplicity is great, but it's not the end-all be-all. Humans are very good at taking in a lot of information and processing it and casting away the information that is not important and focusing on the information that is. Now, a simple response is fantastic in a moment like that, but the reality is that he's going to go to that shopping district, for example, and have to do a lot of processing in the real world, right? And maybe that's their point, is that they want to be a simple user interface, a less intrusive one, so that way you spend more time embedding yourself in the real world. And, there is something to be said about that. But it's also a contrived example, right? And that's really exemplified by the next demo that they do, which is the translation demo. Another really, really cool demo. It's awesome that they're using a deep fake technology to kind of make the experience of a translation more seamless. It really is like the kind of pinnacle of what large language models are really good at right now, which is translating things from one to the other, right? Translating from one language to another, translating from a computer model of a voice to a very human model. In fact, a model of his voice. It is nailing the seamless part of the screenless seamless sensing equation more than anything else. But again, both of these things are really contrived. They're things that the LLMs are very good at, taking a large set of information and narrowing it down, but then also taking a existing set of information and translating it. Those are the two things that LLMs are fantastic at. But it's not the end-all be-all. I'll just keep coming back to that, right? They're contrived. And, he keeps talking about these screens as a bad thing, even saying that, for example, VR, what it's doing is taking what they see as the evil, the screens, and moving them millimeters away from your eyes, right? But it assumes that screens are bad, and it doesn't get at why we like screens so much. So let's go back to what we were talking about before. When we think about the beginnings of a personal computer, right, you might think of a terminal typing away a command. If you think about it, the pin is just the natural extension of that, or Alexa is just the natural extension of that. You are issuing a command to the computer, and the computer gives you an answer back, right? An LLM, an AI, is a much better user interface for that. It's a much better command line interface because you don't need to memorize the esoteric incantations and chant it to the computer as you pray to the gods and it gives you your answer back. But you still need to know what the computer is able to do, right? The problem with the AI pen that we've seen this week is that a lot of times it just doesn't work. In fact, it even says it. Oh, I can't do that, right? Until there comes the point that the pin can do everything that you ask it to do, there will always be a bit of mistrust with the device, right? Because you don't know what it can do. There's this trope that all of these voice assistants, the only thing they're good at is setting timers. And the device can't even do that. It can't set timers. It's been a joke this week that it can't set timers, right? But there's two levels of kind of profound jumps that we've just went through there. Number one, why do people use their devices to set their voice devices to set timers? Well, it's because it's something that they know they can reliably do with it, right? Play music, set timers, and that's pretty much it. Honestly, those are the two things that I see people use their devices for. I guess control smart home things, but that's a whole other can of worms. The second thing is that the AI pen can't even do that, right? And that gets at the issue. Until these AI devices can do everything, you need to essentially still know the magical incantations to ask the computer what it is capable of doing. One-dimensional user interfaces, especially audio-based user interfaces, they don't have a door handle. They don't have affordances. They don't suggest to you what they can do unless they intrude on your life. And for Humane, that's a huge design problem because their whole point is that these computers shouldn't be intruding on your life. And so that gets at why we like screens so much. Screens provide affordances. They allow you to design user interfaces that suggest, hey, reach out to me, touch me, see what I can do. Figure out what this button does. Figure out what this sliding to unlock thing does. Figure out what you can do when you touch the display with multiple fingers. I mean, think about what he says early on, right? He says that he tested the interactions with his daughter, right? He tested those interactions with his daughter, and she was able to do it because the screen was suggesting something to her. It was suggesting what was possible with the device. That is why we like screens so much, is because well, number one, they allow us to consume, which I think is what Humane is pushing back against. But number two, when it comes to using computers as a tool, it allows us to design tools within the tool. And it allows us to design affordances that say, hey, this computer, this magical thing that you have in your hand, can do anything. And here are the things that it can do right now. That is not possible with an audio user interface. That's not possible with an AI UI.
This is moving away from the experiments that make us all concerned about the direction compute is going in, but it's instead using technology to create real, responsible compute products that are in service to us and built on trust. This is good AI in action. And we spent thousands of hours reimagining and redesigning new types of compute interactions, ranging from complex voice commands to intricate hand gestures, all in service of trying to find more natural ways to interact with compute. Why fumble for your phone when you can just hold an object and ask questions about it? The result almost feels like the entire world becomes your operating system. And when compute disappears, it allows us to get back to what really matters, a new ability to be present. Like riding a bicycle in the park and just ripping through emails, or going to a concert without having to hold up your phone to capture it, or experiencing your toddler's first steps without a screen between you and your child.
And so this gets at the core of what I think of as the valid critique that Humane has with screens, which is that they get in between you and the world, right? Literally right here, this is between you and me. You're watching me on your, whatever device you're watching, on your TV, your computer, your phone, your iPad, whatever it is. And that is between you and the world, most likely. Actually, the TV is the best example of one that's not necessarily between you and the world. It's probably against the wall, right? It's one reason why I think TVs are an interesting use of a screen, because it's a communal use of a screen, right? Back to the early days of the computer, right? And his example of recording a child with like a phone, for example, and letting the device get between you and the other person, well, you know, that is true. There is some issue with letting a device separate you and the person you're trying to connect with. You can sense it when you pull out a phone. You really can. And, you know, I can't get over their focus on this screenless thing, though. Because while that is true, that it does separate you, it doesn't meet people where they're at. People like screens. I mean, this is the thing that people have said. People love their phones, but more importantly, people like screens, right? People like, and people, the people at Humane, they're very idealistic with the way they're approaching the design problem of trying to get people away from the screens, right? But if there's anything that I learned while I was a teacher, it's that you have to meet people where they're at. You know, when I went into a classroom with a bunch of ideals and I led from those ideals, instead of using those ideals to guide my relationship with the students that I had, it didn't work. Students didn't listen to me. They didn't care. They didn't have a reason to care. Just because I cared about something didn't mean that they should, right? But as soon as I went to the student and asked them what they wanted or what they were interested in, and drew them in the direction of the ideals that I had and the goals that I had and the standards that we had to achieve from there, that's when we got the most ground covered. Humane is like me coming into the classroom with my set of ideals and trying to lead from there. They think screens bad, right? Screens bad, therefore no screens. And you can even see it in their implementation that they had to shoehorn a notch screen into their device in order to achieve that. Because guess what? Screens are useful. But the thing that they fail to realize is that if they don't meet people where they're at, which is at a place where they're using a screen to achieve some of the work that they're doing, then they've kind of set themselves up to fail. Because guess what? People are always going to, beyond the fact that ChatGPT is more of a feature than a product in its own right, but beyond the fact that, you know, the device itself has kind of flopped a little bit, right, in terms of its actual implementation, the real core of the philosophical issue of the device is that they just swung and missed with the market. They didn't do the marketing they needed to realize that people like their screens and that there's a reason for that, and that moralizing that is actually a failure of the company, not of the people.
In the future, technology will be both ambient and contextual. And this means harnessing AI to really understand you and your surroundings in order to achieve the best results. Imagine this. You've been in meetings all day and you just want a summary of what you've missed. Catch me up.
Patrick is coming to tomorrow's design meeting. Bethany wants to move next week's dinner, and Oliver is asking about soccer this weekend.
These are emails, calendar invites, and messages all surfaced up to the top. You can use these to help guide your decision-making, manage your workload, and sculpt tailored responses in your own voice and in the context of your life. And we gain this context through machine learning. The more you use our device powered by AI, the more we can help you in all times of need. Your AI effectively becomes an ever-evolving, personalized form of memory, and we think that's amazing. In fact, let's say you're health conscious, or you have certain types of food considerations. Let me just show you. Picked up one of these chocolates. Used to eat a ton of these when I was a kid. Can I eat this?
A Milky Bar contains cocoa butter. Given your intolerance, you may want to avoid it.
So I can't eat these anymore. But what's cool is my AI knows what's best for me, but I'm in total control. I'm gonna eat it anyway.
Enjoy it.
Your AI figures out exactly what you need. And by the way, I love that there's no judgment. I think it's amazing to be able to live freely. Your AI figures out what you need at the speed of thought. A sense that will ever be evolving as technology improves too. And these examples are just the start. As AI advances, we will see how it will transform nearly every aspect of our lives in ways that will seem unimaginable right now. In fact, Sam Altman from OpenAI feels the way we do, and that AI is grossly underestimated, and I'll add, so long as we get it right. We really believe that we're only beginning to scratch the surface of what's possible. Embed advancements of AI like in a device that's actually built to disappear and allow experiences to come forward. And we open up entirely new possible ways of how you interact with technology and how you interact with the world around you. More humane, intuitive interactions that are screenless, seamless, and sensing. This is so much more than devices just getting smaller or more powerful. This is the possibility of reimagining the human-technology relationship as we know it. And that's what's so exciting. It's a huge challenge, no doubt, but it's the world that we want to live in. one where technology not only helps you get back into the world, but enhances our ability to do so. It's within reach, and you saw some of it today. The future will not be held in your hand, and it won't be on your face either. The future of technology might almost be invisible. Thank you.
So finally, we get back to the thesis, right? Screenless, seamless sensing. And you know that screenless one is the one that we've harped on here a lot. And you now understand the issues that I have with it. Number one, screens are very useful tools, and they're a very important part of computers. You cannot achieve the same thing with an AI, audio-based user interface, or even text-based one that you can with a graphical one. There's a lot that you can communicate graphically. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Number two, screenless and sensing. Those two come from Mossberg's article, right? He talks so much about how the world he sees as interacting and blending in with our devices. He talks about VR headsets. He talks about AI devices. He talks about those technologies that will carry us forward, right? In his article, he predicted that within 10 years, so this would be 2020, by 2027, we really begin to see a lot of these things starting to happen. Guess what? He was right. We have the AI pin, an AI kind of revolution beginning, and we also have the beginnings of the VR race starting now. And he also said that within 20 years, right, so that would be 2037, that we'd basically be fully there. And I find it hard to believe that he'd be wrong in that, right? And this is really Walt's wisdom. He understood what the people wanted, right? He spent his whole career caring not about the stock prices, not about the companies, not about the people running the companies, but about the consumer, the person at the end of the line. That is why he thinks that seamless devices and sensing devices are going to be so crucial, because guess what? Those two things are really important to consumers. They're important to us, the people buying the products. We want our devices to be part of the world we're in. We don't want them to be episodic. We want them to be woven in as a tool throughout our day. We've seen that with phones. We've seen that with laptops. We've even seen that with PCs, and then all the way back to these big mainframe computers. And of course, we want them to be sensing. We want our computers to react to us, to anticipate our needs, to guess what we want, to help us out, and to not get in our way. So that brings us to Screenless for one last time. It's not something that Mossberg said explicitly in his article. He brings up devices that are screenless, that are examples of his big idea of the disappearing computer. But just because screens are not present in the examples he brought up didn't necessarily mean that you should build a company around something that is screenless. And in fact, I think it is a great irony that the company that failed to recognize where the customer, the consumer, the market was at was the same company that used Walt Mossberg as an idol, as a vehicle to announce their product that would not land well with the customer in the end. Because that was what Mossberg cared about, right? He didn't care about the technology. He didn't stake his claim in dogma other than the fact that the customer was the most important person in the line of succession when it goes from a product's cradle to its grave. So it was a long time coming for Humane, and this close read kind of really shows us that I would call it a dogma of the reality of their kind of moralization that screens are bad is. It was just a miss, unfortunately. And we see, of course, WWDC coming up, and I'm sure that we'll see a lot of the Humane AI Pin features Sherlocked into the devices we already carry with us. I mean, a lot of people have talked about how the watch is going to be a better pin than the AI pin is. It's really the same thing. It's just on my wrist instead of on my lapel. And even another competing product, which like the Rabbit R1, they have a screen on there, and they were not dogmatic about screens being this bad thing, and were just excited about the technology, the fact that AI could be a good UI to augment the current graphical user interfaces we're used to. And I think that both of those approaches are much wiser than Humane's.